wife was sitting in the living room, one hand cradling a glass of wine, the other clutching her phone. I froze mid-step to her at the sound of her voice. She agreed to less. Her words sliced through the air, sharp and deliberate. I couldn't quite grasp their meaning, but something about the tone, the smugness, made my skin crawl. It wasn't the tone of the woman I thought I knew. I stood there, obscured by the shadow of the staircase, straining to catch more. "She doesn't have a choice," Laura continued, her voice dripping with arrogance. "God, the idiot probably thinks it's fair. This whole thing is going to blow over, and I'll come out clean. Just stick to the plan." "The plan? Les?" I felt the breath escape me, as if someone had punched me in the gut. 1,000 questions raced through my head. Who was she talking about? And why did it sound like she was reveling in someone else's misfortune? When she hung up, I made a noise. Not on purpose, but the shock must have loosened some invisible hold on me. She turned, startled, and our eyes met. For the first time in 10 years of marriage, I saw something I couldn't ignore in her eyes: disdain. "Oh, you're home," she said, her lips twisting into a shallow smile, but the warmth was gone. "Didn't hear you come in." I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to scream, demand answers, but my instincts told me to stay quiet. Something about the moment warned me this wasn't the time. So, I swallowed my questions and pretended I hadn't heard anything. But from that night, I began to watch her. Quietly, methodically. I didn't know yet what I was looking for, but the woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone cruel, calculating, and, judging by the faint smirk that always seemed to play at her lips when she thought I wasn't looking, dangerous. The days that followed were torture. I started noticing things I'd been blind to before. Little details that painted a bigger picture. Laura had always been sharp with her words, but now I saw the venom in them. She'd snap at the barista for getting her order wrong, insult the neighbors under the guise of polite conversation, and talk down to me in ways that made my stomach churn. And then there was the secrecy. Laura always kept her phone close, but now it was practically glued to her hand. She'd laugh at texts she wouldn't share, lower her voice during calls, and bolt to another room when I walked in. I told myself it was paranoia, that maybe work was stressing her out. But that voice in the back of my head, the one whispering that she wasn't the woman I'd married, was growing louder by the day. One evening, when she went out with her friends, I decided to dig. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. Her laptop sat on the dining table, locked but not entirely inaccessible. I wasn't a tech genius, but I knew her habits. After a few failed attempts, I cracked the password: our wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on me. At first, there was nothing unusual: work emails, shopping receipts, pictures from vacations. But then I found a folder buried in the depths of her drive titled Personal. Inside were dozens of documents, spreadsheets, and a diary. Not the kind of diary you'd expect to find, the one full of emotions or private musings, but a cold, meticulous log of numbers, dates, and plans. I clicked on one of the files and froze. Prenup loopholes. I scrolled through the document, my pulse quickening. She'd highlighted clauses, written notes in the margins about asset divisions, and listed ways to manipulate arbitration. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife was plotting to drain me dry. And then I found a message draft buried in her email. It wasn't addressed to me. It read, "Don't worry, everything is set. Once this is over, I'll be free of him. Just give me time to work out the details. I'll make sure he doesn't see it coming." I sat back, numb. I wanted to vomit. The woman I thought I loved, the woman I'd built a life with, wasn't just cruel. She was planning my downfall, and I'd been too blind to see it. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind replayed her words from the email, the spreadsheets, the calculated betrayal in every keystroke. I had spent years building a life with her, believing in us, while she had been chiseling away at its foundation. The question that kept circling back to me was, why? What had I done to deserve this? The next morning, Laura was in her usual routine, cheerful, dismissive, and composed. It was infuriating to watch her play the role of a loving wife while knowing what she truly was underneath. But I kept my face neutral, even smiling when she kissed me on the cheek and said, "See you tonight?" As soon as she left for work, I started my investigation. I wanted answers. No, I needed them. That email, the tone of it, suggested she wasn't doing this alone. Someone else was involved. Her phone records were my first target. I had access to our shared account, and though I'd never felt the need to snoop before, I wasn't above it now. A quick glance at her call history revealed one number that appeared far too often to be a coincidence. It wasn't one I recognized, and when I tried to call it, it went straight to voicemail. But the voicemail greeting said it all. Hey, you've reached Jason. Leave a message. Jason. That name struck a chord. Laura had mentioned a Jason in passing a few times. Someone she worked with? A project manager, I think she'd said. I remembered her laughing about his terrible fashion sense one evening. Now, I wondered if the laughter had been a cover for something far more sinister. I dug deeper. His name popped up in her emails, casual exchanges that seemed harmless at first glance. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a familiarity in their tone that didn't match the professional boundaries she claimed to have with colleagues. Then I stumbled upon something that shattered any remaining doubt. It was an email thread from weeks ago, labeled, "For your eyes only." My hands shook as I opened it. Jason. Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything? We can't afford to screw up this late in the game. Laura. Relax, he's clueless. He's still playing the doting husband. I've got him wrapped around my finger. Jason. Good. Once the settlement is finalized, we can finally be done with him. I'll book the tickets for us to celebrate. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding. They were planning to run off together, and I was the pawn funding their getaway. But I wasn't clueless. Not anymore. The email played on a loop in my mind all day. Laura and Jason had underestimated me. They thought I was naive, an oblivious husband too caught up in the comfort of routine to notice the knife hovering at my back. They were wrong, and I would prove it. I couldn't confront her, not yet. Confrontation would tip my hand, give her time to spin the situation, or worse, escape. I needed to play my role, the clueless, unsuspecting husband, for just a little longer. Revenge would taste sweeter if it came with precision, calculated, and cold. The first step was laying the groundwork. That night, I forced myself to smile through dinner with Laura. She talked about her day as though nothing had changed, recounting office politics and gossip. I nodded, laughed at her jokes, and asked questions like I always had. By the way, she said casually, I'll be working late tomorrow. Big project deadline. The lie rolled off her tongue effortlessly, like she'd practiced it 100 times before. I nodded, careful not to let the anger bubbling beneath the surface show. Of course, I said, feigning concern. Don't overwork yourself. You've been so busy lately. She flashed a small smile, sipping her wine. I'm fine. It'll all pay off soon. Her words dripped with irony. She had no idea that the wheels in my head were already turning. The second step was gathering evidence. If Laura thought she'd been careful, she was wrong. I'd watched enough courtroom dramas to know that proof was everything. I started small, forwarding all the incriminating emails to a private account and photographing anything that seemed relevant in her documents. The prenup loopholes, her financial projections, they all went into my growing arsenal. Then came the hard part, following her. That Friday night, when she left the house for work, I waited 10 minutes before slipping out the door. I'd borrowed a car from an old friend who owed me a favor, a beat-up sedan that Laura wouldn't recognize. I trailed her cautiously, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice. She didn't go to the office. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant on the other side of town. Through the haze of streetlights, I saw her step out of the car, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the side mirror. She looked radiant, a picture-perfect image of elegance and charm. But all I could see was betrayal. Jason was waiting for her by the entrance. He kissed her cheek, his hand resting on the small of her back as they disappeared inside. I parked across the street and watched them through the restaurant's large windows. They laughed, their heads leaning in close, the chemistry undeniable. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took photos, clear, indisputable evidence of her infidelity. It wasn't enough to destroy her financially. No, I needed to ruin her reputation, her carefully crafted facade of perfection. As I drove home that night, a plan began to form. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, justice for the years I'd wasted on her, for the man she'd made me believe I was. Laura and Jason thought they were playing a game, but they didn't realize I was rewriting the rules. I spent the weekend preparing, playing the long game. It wasn't just about catching Laura and her lies. It was about making her feel the walls close in, inch by inch, until she realized there was no escape. Step 1 was isolation. Laura thrived on her image. The successful wife, the charming colleague, the woman everyone admired. But I knew her reputation was as fragile as the lies she built it on. On Monday, I sent an anonymous package to her boss. Inside were the emails between her and Jason, carefully curated to highlight their affair and how they'd been using company time and resources to orchestrate their plans. I attached screenshots of their restaurant meeting from Friday night, along with a polite note, "Thought you should know what's happening under your nose." By Tuesday, I could see the cracks forming. Laura came home looking frazzled, her usual poise slipping. "How was work?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Fine," she muttered, brushing past me. "Just fine," I pressed. She shot me a look. "What do you want me to say?" "It's work. It's stressful." Her tone was sharp, defensive. I knew she suspected something but didn't dare voice it. Step 2 was turning Jason into a liability. I tracked down his fiancée, a woman named Diane who, from what little I could gather online, was blissfully unaware of his extracurricular activities. It took some digging, but I found her contact information and sent her a similar anonymous package. Emails, photos, proof of his betrayal. The fallout was immediate. On Thursday, Laura's phone buzzed incessantly during dinner. She ignored it at first, but as the calls kept coming, her composure faltered. "Who's blowing up your phone?" I asked casually. "Work," she said too quickly, shoving the device into her purse. But later that night, as she showered, I saw her phone light up with Jason's name. The preview of his message was short but panicked. "We need to talk. Diane knows." Step 3 was financial. Laura was meticulous with money, which meant she kept all her passwords saved in a neat little folder on her laptop. I transferred half the funds from our joint account into a new one in my name. A precaution, I told myself, in case things escalated. The rest I left untouched for now, knowing she'd never notice. Laura rarely looked at the balance. She only cared that it was there when she needed it. By Friday, the tension in the house was suffocating. Laura was jumpy, snapping at me over trivial things. I played my role perfectly, the clueless husband, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. "Everything okay?" I asked that evening as she poured herself a second glass of wine. She forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed her. "Of course. Just a lot on my plate right now," I nodded, suppressing the satisfaction curling in my chest. She didn't know it yet, but the plate she'd piled so high was about to come crashing down. The weekend would bring the next stage of my plan, one designed to shatter what little control Laura had left. She had wanted to play games, but she had no idea how cruel I could be when I stopped pretending to care. Saturday morning came, and with it, the first true sign that Laura's carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, her face pale and drawn. "What's wrong?" I asked, masking the delight I felt at her obvious distress. "Work drama," she said curtly, not meeting my eyes. "Oh." I leaned on the counter, feigning concern. "Anything I can help with?" She shook her head. "No, it's nothing. Just politics." I almost laughed at how desperately she was trying to hold it together. I knew exactly what was happening. Her boss had likely confronted her about the affair, and if my hunch was correct, Jason's implosion had only added fuel to the fire. Later that day, I saw her pacing in the backyard, phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't the composed, manipulative woman I'd overheard weeks ago. She was panicking. "What do you mean you can't fix it?" I caught snippets of her conversation. "I've already cleaned up my side. You need to handle yours." There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Probably Jason. "Don't you dare pin this on me," she hissed. "If Diane's coming for you, that's your problem. I told you to keep things quiet." She stormed back inside a few minutes later, slamming the sliding door behind her. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for any hint of suspicion. Fine, she snapped. Why wouldn't it be? I shrugged. You just seem on edge. She didn't reply, just grabbed her purse and headed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. That night, while she slept, I enacted the next phase of my plan. I had already accessed her laptop before, but now I went deeper. Her cloud storage revealed something I hadn't expected. A fake work account she used for personal communication. There were dozens of messages between her and Jason, and the latest ones were frantic. Jason, Diane's lawyer, called. She's suing me for emotional damages. She knows about the money. Laura, she can't prove anything. Stop panicking and figure it out. Jason, I'm done, Laura. I can't handle this. We're going to get caught. Laura, don't be an idiot. Just stick to the plan. We'll get through this if you don't screw it up. I forwarded every single message to my private account. It was a treasure trove of proof, not just of their affair, but of their joint schemes. I wasn't finished. From what I could piece together, Laura and Jason had funneled some of his fiancée's money into a hidden account to fund their future plans. The details were buried in her cloud storage, poorly disguised under innocuous file names. I sent it all to Diane. The next morning, Laura was distant, but I knew it wasn't just because of me. I could tell she was waiting for something, her nerves barely contained. Around noon, her phone buzzed, and I saw the color drain from her face. She grabbed it and bolted into the other room. Moments later, I heard her yelling, "What do you mean she knows? How?" Her voice cracked, and I savored every second of her unraveling. Laura returned to the kitchen, pale and shaken, barely acknowledging me. She fumbled for her keys, muttering something about needing to run errands. I just smiled. "Take your time," I said. "I've got everything under control here." She didn't respond, just rushed out the door. But she wasn't in control anymore. And soon, she'd know it. Laura didn't return until late that evening, her face a mask of fury and fear. She barely looked at me as she stormed into the house, her heels clicking like gunfire against the hardwood floor. "Long day?" I asked, lounging on the couch, my tone deliberately light. "Don't start with me," she snapped, tossing her purse onto the counter. I shrugged and turned back to the TV, but inside, I was grinning. She was unraveling faster than I'd hoped. She disappeared into the bedroom without another word. A few minutes later, I heard the muffled sound of her voice on a call, followed by an unmistakable crash. A lamp, perhaps? I didn't go to check. I wanted her to sit in her chaos, stewing in the consequences of her lies. The next morning, I decided it was time to accelerate things. I had everything I needed to destroy her. Evidence of her infidelity, her financial schemes, and her betrayal of Jason. But I wasn't ready to go nuclear just yet. First, I wanted her to feel the walls close in a little more. While she was at work, I contacted her parents. Laura had always prided herself on being the golden child, the one her parents bragged about at family gatherings. They adored her, or rather, they adored the image of her that she had so carefully crafted. But I knew something they didn't. Laura's parents were deeply conservative, the kind of people who valued family and loyalty above all else. I sent them an anonymous package, much like the ones I'd sent her boss and Jason's fiancée. Only this time, I included a carefully written letter. "Your daughter has been lying to you. She's been unfaithful to her husband and is actively involved in schemes that could ruin multiple lives. I'm sending this because I believe you deserve to know the truth." Enclosed are emails, photos, and other evidence of her actions. I hope you'll hold her accountable for the pain she's caused. I mailed it with no return address and sat back, knowing the fallout would be monumental. By Wednesday, the cracks in Laura's world were turning into chasms. She came home from work early, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "Sure," I said, setting my book down and gesturing to the chair across from me. She hesitated before sitting, wringing her hands like a nervous teenager. "Something's been off lately," she began. "Have you noticed anything strange?" I raised an eyebrow. "Strange? Like what?" "I don't know," she said quickly. Just weird things happening at work. Personal stuff coming up that shouldn't be anyone's business. I gave her my best puzzled look. That's awful. Any idea who's behind it? She stared at me, her eyes searching my face for any hint of deception. I held her gaze, calm and steady. No, she said finally, her voice flat. No idea. Well, I said, leaning back in my chair. If you need anything, I'm here for you. The irony of my words wasn't lost on me, and for a split second, I thought I saw doubt flicker across her face. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew the thought had to be creeping into her mind. Does he know? She didn't realize the answer was yes, but soon she would. The next day, the storm finally hit. Laura came home in a frenzy, slamming the front door behind her. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair clung to her face like she'd been sweating bullets. She threw her bag onto the floor, paced the living room, and then whirled to face me. "Did you say something to my parents?" she demanded, her voice sharp, her tone venomous. I stayed seated on the couch, keeping my expression neutral. "What are you talking about?" She jabbed a finger at me. "Don't play dumb with me. They called me today, furious. My mother was crying. My father wants answers. They said someone sent them proof of." She stopped herself, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Proof of what?" I asked, my tone calm but laced with just enough curiosity to sound convincing. She glared at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of guilt. When she didn't find what she was looking for, she ran a hand through her hair and let out a frustrated sigh. "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "It's nothing." But I could tell it wasn't nothing. Her parents were pillars of her carefully curated world, and their judgment mattered to her more than anything. If they were furious, it meant the foundation of her golden child status was beginning to crumble. "Sounds like a rough day," I said, standing and heading toward the kitchen. "Want me to pour you a glass of wine?" She shot me a suspicious glance but didn't say no. The first blow was landed, and now it was time to deliver the second. That evening, while she was in the shower, I sent a message to her boss using a burner email account. "Have you checked Laura's company laptop? You might find some interesting correspondence with Jason regarding inappropriate use of resources. If not, I'd be happy to share what I have." The response came almost immediately. "Who is this? What do you know?" I didn't reply. The seed was planted. By Friday, Laura's stress was palpable. She barely spoke to me, her usual facade of confidence slipping with every passing hour. At dinner, her phone buzzed relentlessly, but she ignored it. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending to care. "Fine," she snapped, stabbing at her salad with a fork. It was far from fine. I'd overheard her on the phone earlier that day, arguing with Jason. "You're not backing out now," she had hissed. "We're in this together." Jason must have said something that rattled her, because her voice cracked when she added, "Don't you dare leave me to clean up this mess." The walls were closing in, and I was watching it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction. The weekend came, and I decided it was time to raise the stakes. I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, laying out everything I had gathered. The emails, the financial schemes, the photos of her with Jason. The lawyer was impressed by my preparation and promised to draft a plan that would leave Laura with as little as possible. "She's going to regret underestimating you," he said with a wry smile. "She already does," I replied. The next move would be my boldest yet, a direct confrontation with Jason. I wasn't just going to ruin his relationship with Diane. I was going to dismantle his life entirely. By Monday, I was ready to light the match that would burn Laura's entire scheme to the ground. My first target was Jason. While Laura was at work, I made a phone call using another burner number, disguising my voice just enough to sound unfamiliar. "Jason," I said when he picked up. "Who is this?" His tone was sharp, defensive. He was already on edge. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that I know everything. About you. About Laura. About Diane." There was a long pause, then, "What do you want?" "To help you." He scoffed. "Help me? Why the hell would you want to do that?" "Because Laura's lying to you," I said, keeping my tone calm and calculated. "You think she's got your back, but the second you're no longer useful, she'll leave you to take the fall. It's what she does." That's bullshit. Is it? Think about it, Jason. Has she been distant? Has she been pushing you to clean up your side of the mess while keeping her hands clean? I let the silence hang between us. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Why should I trust you? He asked finally. I don't care if you trust me, I replied. But you should know this. Laura's been looking into ways to protect herself. She's already spoken to her lawyer. When this all comes crashing down, you'll be the one holding the bag. I gave him a moment to process that before dropping the bomb. Check your joint account. The money Laura promised to split with you? It's already gone. I hung up before he could respond, knowing he'd take the bait. That night, Laura came home later than usual. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild, and she was clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She didn't even acknowledge me as she stormed past, heading straight for the bedroom. I followed her casually, leaning against the doorframe as she threw her purse onto the bed. Tough day? I asked. She spun around, her eyes narrowing. Why do you keep asking me that? I shrugged. Just trying to be supportive. Well, don't, she snapped, turning back to her phone. I lingered in the doorway, watching as she frantically typed out a text. I didn't need to see the screen to know she was messaging Jason. The following morning, my prediction came true. Jason cracked. I received an email from him, sent to the same burner address I'd used to contact him. You were right. She's been lying to me. I found the transfers she made out of our account. What do you want me to do? I smiled, typing out a reply. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street at 3 p.m. We'll talk. At 3 p.m., I was waiting at a small table in the corner of the coffee shop. Jason walked in, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. He spotted me immediately and froze, his eyes widening in recognition. You're... I held up a hand, cutting him off. Sit down. He hesitated but obeyed, sliding into the chair across from me. You didn't expect it to be me, did you? I asked, keeping my tone casual. What the hell is this? He demanded. This, I said, leaning forward, is your chance to save yourself. Laura's been playing you, Jason. You think you're her partner, but you're just her pawn. She wouldn't. She would, I interrupted. And she has. Do you really think she cares about you? She's already laying the groundwork to protect herself. You're disposable to her. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. I could see the cracks forming, his certainty crumbling under the weight of doubt. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to help me destroy her. Jason stared at me, his expression a cocktail of disbelief, anger, and desperation. For a moment, I thought he might walk out, that his pride or fear would outweigh his desire for revenge. But then he sighed, leaning back in his chair, his shoulders slumping as if he'd been carrying the weight of the world. What do you have in mind? He asked, his voice low. I smirked. It's simple. We work together to dismantle Laura's plans and expose her for what she is. You've already seen how ruthless she can be. You and I both know she's not going to let you walk away unscathed. Jason rubbed his temples, clearly torn. I don't trust you, he admitted. You don't have to, I said. Trust yourself. You know she's lying to you. You've seen the proof. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for a hidden agenda. Finally, he nodded. Fine, he said. I'm in. That night, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. Jason had given me access to additional messages and documents Laura had shared with him. Messages where she detailed her plans to manipulate our prenup and schemes to siphon money into hidden accounts. Together, we compiled everything into a damning package, one that painted a crystal-clear picture of her deceit. But it wasn't enough to just expose her. I wanted Laura to feel the consequences in every corner of her life. By midweek, Jason and I had executed our plan flawlessly. We started with her workplace. Jason filed an anonymous complaint to HR, attaching evidence of their affair and misuse of company resources. It was the kind of scandal that no employer could ignore, especially in a corporate environment as conservative as hers. Next, we turned to her social circle. Using a burner social media account, I leaked snippets of her conversations and photos of her with Jason to a few of her closest friends. I knew the gossip would spread like wildfire. Laura's friendships were built on appearances, and nothing would shatter her image faster than the truth. Finally, we targeted her finances. Jason tipped me off to another hidden account she'd opened under her maiden name. It didn't take much effort to track it down and report it to the authorities for suspected fraud. By Friday, the cracks in Laura's world had become chasms. She came home early that evening, her face pale and her hands shaking. "Something's wrong," she said, collapsing onto the couch. I put on my best mask of concern. "What happened?" She ran a hand through her hair, her voice breaking. "HR called me in today. Someone's accusing me of misconduct. And then, God, I don't even know how, but my friends, they're all acting weird. One of them sent me a message asking if it was true, if I've been having an affair." I raised an eyebrow, feigning shock. "An affair? Where would they even get that idea?" "I don't know," she snapped, tears welling in her eyes. "Everything's falling apart." I wanted to laugh, to revel in her panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was only the beginning. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," I offered, my voice gentle. She shook her head. "No, it's more than that. It feels deliberate, like someone's out to get me." She looked at me then, her eyes narrowing. "Do you know anything about this?" I held her gaze, my expression unreadable. Why would I? As Laura spiraled further into paranoia, I knew the next stage of my plan would be the most satisfying yet, confronting her with everything I knew. But not yet. I wanted her to squirm just a little longer. By the weekend, Laura was unraveling. Every step of her plan, the lies, the manipulation, the schemes she'd built so carefully, was crumbling in slow motion, and she had no idea why. She was snapping at everyone. Her boss, her friends, even me. The mask she'd worn for years was slipping, revealing the real woman beneath. The once poised and confident Laura now looked fragile, constantly checking her phone, jumping at shadows, her paranoia eating her alive. Sunday morning, I decided it was time to twist the knife. Laura was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee with shaking hands. She hadn't said more than a few words to me since waking up, too consumed by whatever chaos was brewing in her head. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning casually against the counter. She flinched, her eyes darting to me before quickly looking away. "Fine," she muttered. "You don't seem fine," I pressed, watching her squirm. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might snap at me again. But instead, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know what's happening," she admitted quietly. I took a sip of my coffee, hiding the smirk threatening to form on my lips. "Maybe you should talk to someone about it. Get it off your chest." She shot me a wary glance, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" I shrugged. "I mean, sometimes secrets have a way of catching up with people. Maybe it's better to come clean before things get worse." Her face went pale, her coffee cup trembling in her hand. "What are you trying to say?" "Nothing," I said with a smile, walking out of the kitchen. "Just a thought." Later that afternoon, I met Jason again. He was a wreck, his guilt and anger at Laura consuming him. "She called me," he said, his voice trembling, begging me to cover for her at work. "She wants me to lie to HR and say the accusations are fake." "And?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He shook his head. "I'm done. I'm not lying for her." "Good," I said, "because we're not done yet." Jason looked at me, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What else could we possibly do?" I leaned forward, my voice low and deliberate. "We expose her completely, to everyone. She thinks she's untouchable, but we're going to show her just how wrong she is." Monday morning, I put the final phase into motion. I sent everything, every email, every photo, every piece of evidence Jason and I had gathered, to a carefully curated list of recipients. Her boss, her coworkers, her closest friends, her parents, even the HOA, just for good measure. The email was simple. "This is who Laura really is." I attached every piece of damning evidence, ensuring there was no way for her to spin it, no way for her to deny it. And then I waited. That evening, Laura stumbled through the front door, her face ashen, her hands trembling. She looked like a ghost, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed. She didn't speak, didn't look at me. She just sank onto the couch, staring at the floor as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her. "What happened?" I asked, feigning concern. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They know. Who knows?" "Everyone." She finally looked up at me then, tears streaming down her face. "Did you do this?" I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence hang between us. Then, I smiled. "What do you think?" Laura's face twisted in shock and betrayal as she processed my words. For a moment, I thought she might explode, but instead, she just stared at me, her expression crumbling like shattered glass. "It was you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You did this to me." I shrugged, leaning back in the chair. "Did what, Laura? Reveal the truth? Share your carefully guarded secrets? Tell everyone exactly who you are." Her breathing quickened, and she clutched the edge of the couch as though the ground beneath her had become unstable. "You ruined me," she spat, her tears now giving way to fury. "My career, my friends, my parents, they're all gone. Do you even realize what you've done?" I stood and slowly walked over to her, towering above her now small figure. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done, Laura. I've taken back everything you tried to steal from me. You thought you were smarter than me, that I was just some oblivious husband you could manipulate and discard when I wasn't useful anymore. But you were wrong." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. I could see the cracks in her armor widening, the realization that there was no way out sinking in. "I trusted you," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I loved you." "No, you didn't," I said, my tone ice cold. "You loved what I could give you. You loved using me, lying to me, laughing at me behind my back while you schemed with Jason." She flinched at his name. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I cut her off. "I understand that you're a parasite. You take and take until there's nothing left, and then you move on to the next victim." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "But this time, Laura, you picked the wrong man to betray." The next morning, the fallout became public. Laura's company officially terminated her for violating their ethics policy. Her social circle had turned their backs on her entirely. Mutual friends who once adored her now sent me messages of sympathy, expressing their disgust at her actions. Even her parents had gone silent, unwilling to take her calls after the evidence of her betrayal reached them. Jason wasn't faring much better. Diane had filed for divorce, taking with her not just his pride but also a substantial portion of his finances. He texted me that morning. "She's not answering my calls. I think she's done with me too." "Good," I replied. Jason had served his purpose. Whatever loyalty he might have had left to Laura was gone, burned up in the fire of her lies. That evening, Laura confronted me again. This time, her anger was gone. She was hollow, defeated, her eyes rimmed red from hours of crying. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why what?" I replied, my tone as calm as ever. "Why did you destroy me?" I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Maybe it was because you said I was clueless. Or maybe it was when you told Jason you had me wrapped around your finger. Or maybe it was because I gave you everything, and you repaid me with betrayal." Her chin quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might beg. But instead, she just shook her head. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "A terrible mistake." "No," I said, stepping closer. "A mistake is forgetting your keys. A mistake is buying the wrong brand of coffee. What you did, Laura, wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. And now, you're paying for it." She stared at me, her tears falling silently before finally breaking. She sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, the weight of her actions crushing her. I stood over her, unmoved. She deserved every ounce of the pain she was feeling, every sleepless night, every tear shed. And I wasn't finished yet. By the time Laura's sobs had subsided, the house was eerily quiet. She stayed on the floor, her body slumped as if she no longer had the energy to hold herself upright. I stood over her, my arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. "I have nothing left," she finally murmured, her voice hoarse. "No job, no friends, no family, nothing." For a brief second, I felt a flicker of pity, but it vanished just as quickly as it came. She had chosen this path, and now she was walking it alone. "You still have the house," I said coldly. "For now." Her head snapped up, her red-rimmed eyes wide with fear. "What does that mean?" I took a step closer, kneeling so we were face to face. "It means that this is only the beginning. You thought you could take everything from me, my money, my reputation, my life, and leave me in ruins. But now, Laura, I'm taking it all back." She shook her head, her hands trembling. "You can't." "You wouldn't?" "Oh, I would," I said, cutting her off. "And I have." The next day, I filed for divorce. My lawyer wasted no time filing motions that froze our joint accounts and began the process of securing the house in my name. Thanks to the prenup, ironically, one of the very documents Laura had tried to manipulate, her position was already weak. But the real blow came when I filed a civil suit against her. Using the evidence I'd gathered, I accused her of fraud and emotional damages, claiming she had used our marriage as a means to enrich herself while plotting against me. The suit was airtight. My lawyer had warned me that civil cases of this nature could take time, but I was patient. I didn't need an immediate victory. I just needed her to feel the weight of what was coming. Laura tried to fight back, of course. She hired a lawyer, one of the best she could afford with what little money she had left. But her arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence I'd accumulated. Emails, photos, financial records. All of it painted a damning picture of her deceit. At every turn, I made it clear that I wasn't interested in reconciliation. This wasn't about saving the marriage or coming to a mutual understanding. This was about retribution. By the time the court date arrived, Laura was a shell of the woman she used to be. She had lost her job, her friends, her parents' respect, and her reputation. Jason had abandoned her completely, refusing to answer her calls or respond to her messages. When the judge ruled in my favor, awarding me the house, the majority of our assets, and a substantial portion of her dwindling savings, I saw the last spark of defiance in her eyes flicker out. That night, as she packed her belongings, I watched her in silence. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the weight of finality. She paused in the doorway, her suitcase in hand, and looked back at me one last time. "I loved you," she said softly, her voice hollow. "No, you didn't," I replied. "You loved control. You loved winning. And now that you've lost, you can't handle it." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't reply. As the door closed behind her, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, her cruelty. And Laura? She was finally facing the consequences of the life she'd built.